Well, it's been a little while since I hung this 4.5 pound Thor Arvika, and since I did, I've been waiting for a tree to come along so I could give it a test chop. Finally, the wait is over. A tree has come my way. A little bit more tree than I was kind of ready for, but I think it's going to be a good one to test this axe on. So this is a tree that was felled a few suburbs away a couple of weeks ago. Saw some people offering it on for pickup on Marketplace, and I thought that looks pretty good. Couldn't really see how big it was. When I got there, I realised it was quite a substantial tree with some very big logs. This was about as much as I could handle by myself with a dolly trolley and a trailer on the back of the Kingswood. So as best I can tell, this is a narrow-leafed Ironbark, Eucalyptus creba, or in Yagara, jandurro. So it's got a very hard, deeply furrowed bark, and the timber is super dense and very heavy, which made moving it quite challenging. Anyway, I got it here. So now I'll get it set up on my little chopping setup here, and then we'll give the Arvika a bit of a run. So finally managed to get myself some log dogs. It's taken a while. They're not the sort of thing you can just go and buy in the shop, but I've got two different types. I've got the sort of standard staples that just sort of go in like that, and then these ones with a 90-degree bend in them that I'm presuming you can kind of put in on the long axis of the log. So I'm going to give these a go, see how that goes. Always play a tune on my log dogs. Alright, that feels good. Last time I did some chopping, I nearly passed out from heat stroke. It was so hot and humid, and told myself, never again, only in winter. Here I am, start of autumn, still sweating like a mofo. It's just so, they're heavy and damp at the moment. The weather is just really humid. Anyway, not much I can do about it. Otherwise, I'll never get to chop anything. Anyway, welcome to Queensland. Beautiful and sunny one day, sweaty and horrible the next. So, I did a pretty long and detailed video on hanging, making a sheath and stuff for this axe. So if you haven't seen that, check it out. But this is my 4.5 pound Thor Arvika. Alright, so let's have a little bit of a closer look at this axe. Beautiful shaped axe. I really love the profile on these. They're like the bits like sort of up around, touching on 150 mil, so really wide bit. Pole, it's about 90, which is pretty standard for these early Tasmanian pattern axes. And they've got, quite a deep heel that sort of adds to that distinctive profile with the wide bit. And then they often have, you can see the cheeks have been hollowed out a little bit there, sort of flattish in the middle. Gives it a sort of gently convex profile across the middle of the cheeks there, so slightly raised centerline. So classic Tassie profile, which is great for throwing chips. The thing about them is though, other than the shape, you don't get a lot of clues as to what kind of axe you're dealing with. Pretty much the only marking on these, and it's often not very good, is that little stamp up there, and then also the quite distinctive font for the weight. I think 4.5 pounds. I think because they're rare and there's nothing written on it. There's a lot of confusion out there as to the origins and history of these axes. I know there's not a lot of information available, and I think a lot of misinformation has appeared over the years because people are just sort of making stuff up or putting things, drawing conclusions with not having the full picture. I know I'm guilty of doing that with some of the things I said in my last video about putting this particular axe together. So keen to sort of correct some of this stuff now. But that symbol there, I used to think it was some kind of weird Swedish rune or something, harking back to the Vikings or something like that. But it's actually what it is a A and a Y superimposed on each other, and it is a reference to the Arvika Yixfabri, or the Arvika Axe Factory. That stamp seems to appear on all the axes that were produced in that particular factory. So it was founded in 1909 in the town of Arvika in Sweden, and around 1912, I think, there was a merger between the Arvika Axe Factory and Yixfabri Thor, or the Thor Axe Factory, which had started making axes around 1901. And that merger continued through until 1922. And I think I've seen a few axes that, in addition to the Arvika Axe Factory symbol, also have Thor underneath. And I'm assuming those are the axes that were produced during this period between 1912 and 1922, because in 1922, that partnership between Thor and Arvika and the tool factory and the axes and stuff went into liquidation. So after the sort of collapse of that partnership between Arvika and Thor in 1923, AB Arvika Redden's Cup Fabri, so the Arvika tool factory, took over operations at the factory complex in Arvika, and they continued to make axes and various tools there through until 1932. And after 1932, operations shifted to Eskilstuna, which is a nearby town. So when that happened, and right up until, so they continued producing axes and other tools under the Arvika name in Eskilstuna from 1932 onwards. But it seems like that's when the stamps changed, or I'm assuming that's when the stamps changed, because you see a change to from that AY brand for the Arvika Tool Factory, or the Arvika Axe Factory, sorry, to a stamp where it has Arvika Sweden inside a diamond with a weight underneath. And Arvika axes with that stamp seem to be a lot more common. So I'm thinking there from this later production period, and after sort of the end of the 1950s, so probably around 1959 or so, production there ceased, and the brand Arvika was taken up by Holtzbrook, and they've continued to make Tasmanian pattern axes under the brand of the Arvika 5-star ever since. As far as when these axes appear in Australia, as best I've been able to work out, they don't really come onto the market in Australia, at least insofar as old advertising goes, until kind of around the mid-1920s. You start to see mentions of Swedish Arvika axes, or Arvika axes, best quality steel Arvika axes, those kind of things appearing in newspapers and such. So if that's the case, that would actually make sense with regard to the stamps. I've never seen one having Thor on them. So it sort of suggests to me that they are these ones that were made between 1923 and 1932 at the Arvika Axe Factory in Arvika. Anyway, really nice axe. Keen to use it. It's fucking started raining. one of the things about it, I mean, I'm not totally sure if it was on its original hickory handle. It might have been. Either way, this handle, like, it's a beautiful handle, but it's got terrible, like nearly horizontal grain alignment, which normally you'd think would be pretty bad. Might be okay, might make for a flexier handle. Could break first few swings. I'm kind of a bit nervous about using it, but it's only a handle, and it could be really good, so we'll give it a go. So when I put this axe together, I gave the head a 20-degree primary bevel and then put a little micro-bevel on that. That seems to be a pretty good angle for most of the Australian hardwoods that I tend to chop with these axes, so hopefully it does all right on the old Ironbark. Well, it has cut really well. I don't know if you can tell, but this wood is so hard. I don't know. I know it's pretty fresh, but man, but it's cutting through it. You know, to start off a nice notch. I don't know if I'm going to keep going because it's kind of getting dark and I'm sweating everywhere. Good thing for the axe and for micro-bevel is that the hang has held up. No movement at all. Feels very solid. And this old handle with its horizontal grain has held up beautifully. There's a nice bit of flex in it. A few times when I got kind of a bit stuck in there because it doesn't have the biggest cheeks, could feel it kind of flexing. And also when it hit and penetrated the timber, I could feel the flex. It's nice. So micro-bevel, you are vindicated for now. Well, that was hard, sweaty work. Probably leaving it for a week 2 weeks actually. Wasn't the best idea. It's even harder now. But yeah, it's hard going. I imagine, there's people out there going, oh, change your swing, fix, narrow the angle of the grind, the handle's too short, whatever. I think I'm chopping okay. I think the axe is performing really well. It's just this stuff is tough. So in addition to being really dense and heavy, ironbark, narrow-leafed ironbark is quite hard. So between 12 and 14 on the Janka scale. This now, given it's probably like a month or so since it was cut down, it's probably like around 13 or so, starting to dry out. So it's hard. But then the other thing, and like if I threw a few decent chips, but they're not coming out as easily as you might like. And one of the reasons for that is the nature of the grain. So with a number of eucalyptus species like this one, also corimbia, the bloodwoods, so things like spotted gum. One of the things that makes them so tough and in a lot of cases quite elastic is that they've got what's referred to as a wavy or interlocking grain. You can really see that quite well on some of these bigger chips. So the grains kind of weave together and interlock, and they don't just do it in one plane. They sort of do it in 3 dimensions. Like as the tree grows, they kind of the grain pattern disperses through the timber, and it just means that it is really hard to get chunks to fly off, and also when it comes time to splitting this stuff, which I'll do later, they don't split nice and easily like a lot of straighter grain timbers. So just adding to the gnarly nature of this timber. So with things like spotted gum, this wavy grain is what often, depending on how the timber is cut, it's often what gives what's referred to as a fiddleback pattern that you often see in some really nice spotted gum handles. There we go. Whew. Well, made it through. I got to say, that's some of the toughest wood I've ever chopped. And it's supposed to be green, but far out, that heartwood, so hard. Every now and then the axe would literally just bounce off it. But got through in the end. Through some pretty sizable chips once we got through that grain. That was a good one. Here's another decent one. Took much longer than I thought. Oh, but I got to say, this 4.5 pounds Arvika on this old hickory handle, maybe original, maybe not, but with the ridiculous horizontal grain pattern, it has handled this easily. The hang has not moved. The blade, I can barely. I'll have a look in the workshop, but I can't see any chips or anything on that edge. It's pretty much as sharp as when I did it. Micro-bevel is still fully intact, and the handle, totally solid. Got a bit of flex in it, but I kind of like that. The palm swell felt nice. I got a bit sweaty, but it did really well. I like it. It's got, it's definitely a Tasmanian pattern. Doesn't have very much of a pole. Probably a little bit more than some of the other ones. Very fat through the cheeks. It's only got a slightly raised center line, so the cheeks are kind of gently convex, little hollowed out towards the heel and the toe. So it pushes the chips out. I mean, I think any axe, no matter what the design, amongst the various sort of tweaks the Tasmanian pattern you'd have trouble throwing chips on this stuff. No, I'm just really happy with it. I'm really glad the handle held up. I kept having nightmares thinking it was going to splinter on me every time I was hitting that hard timber, but it's held up. It's good. So, Matt Keevil, we're all good. You might be right about this actually being a deliberate choice for some handles, or at least for some people. They might like that. I kind of like it. Might just get lucky though, who knows. Anyway, great axe. I'll split this up later, maybe with this, might be with box splitter, given how hard it is. But we'll have a look at the edge when I get back into the workshop and clean it up a bit. But looks really good. Nice work, Vika. Over 100 years old, I'd say, and still going strong. Alright, so just back in the workshop. Haven't cleaned or done anything to the Vika. Just pretty much straight after chopping. And I mean, it's pretty impressive that you can still see pretty well the micro-bevel on there. There's hardly a mark in it. I mean, these are all little, this is just surface scratches and sap and stuff. The steel has held up so well, given how tough that timber is. It's pretty impressive. You often hear people say, oh, such and such an axe, or a certain brand, is really good steel. And I've heard that with regard to Thor Arvika. It was definitely nice to sharpen, and it held a really good edge. But that was the test on that really hard ironbark, and barely need to strop it. It's still razor sharp. Fantastic axe. Love it. All right. On to the next one. Thanks for watching.